Oh man, I wish this discussion could go on forever.
Ignore the bell. We're gonna keep going, people.
Hello and welcome to an Ignore the Bell podcast on The Walking Dead. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
We are talking about The Walking Dead.
Yeah, and I understand we have another sponsor for
We
today's
sure do.
episode.
Yeah, a very generous sponsor, Candy Brains. For the perfect after brain snack, try Candy Brains. You know.
Yeah, fantastic little dessert. I hope that's not a real thing, by the way.
We're going to get in trouble for that. Candy Brains cannot be associated with zombies or The Walking Dead. We are a wholesome company, and we don't support cannibalism or anything like that.
All right, so I'm going to get the timer started here. All right, so we're going to go for about an hour on The Walking Dead. Now, I have not read the graphic novels, and I have not started watching this season. I think they're on season 8 now of the AMC series.
At least, yeah, 8 or 9.
Yeah, and I think I've seen only the first season of Fear the Walking Dead.
Okay, me too. I think I've seen the first season of it. I haven't been watching the most recent season of The Walking Dead, and I've read most of the comic books, but I haven't read. I don't know. I've gone up to wherever the end of Compendium 3 is, which is, let me see, like what issue number that ends up being. That goes to issue like 144, and so there's maybe like 20 or 30. It's probably 30. I don't know. It might even be a little bit more than that. But I've read probably 80% of the series. I'm up to maybe like 2016 or something like that. So I'm a few years behind, but with the comic books. But just before the Whisperers War is where I'm at, which I don't know if they're doing in this season of The Walking Dead or if they are still dealing with the Negan storyline.
I think it's a little bit of both.
Right.
I only saw the first episode of the most recent season, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, like, have you set the timer yet, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's already going. So.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, I need to make this disclaimer at the very beginning of the podcast. I'm trying to restrain. I will try my very best to restrain myself, and this is just going to be The Walking Dead, our like first discussion, because I imagine that we're probably going to have a second and maybe a third discussion as like they continue producing more episodes. And there's like Fear the Walking Dead, and then I'm sure that there's now going to be some movies featuring Andrew Lincoln with Rick Grimes, because now that he is not dead, but he's not on the show anymore. Right. And I believe AMC announced that they were doing something like 3 films. But so there will be other Walking Dead discussions. But the reason, the thing that I have to bring up, first of all, is that in pretty much a literal way, I have a master's degree on The Walking Dead. So it's a little bit I've got a bit of an advantage in this, like, but compared to most people, like, I know the comics really, really well. I've spent a lot of time with them. This is like the third compendium, right? So you've got this one, and then this is compendium 2, and you can see. I'll bring it closer to the camera. Like the extensive notes.
Yes.
On top of that, like that's compendium 1. I mean, I wrote a 50-something page paper. It was supposed to just be a master's research project, but it ended up being the length of a master's thesis on the Walking Dead comics. But I did talk about the TV series in some detail, but basically The Walking Dead being an allegory for contemporary fears and anxieties about illegal immigration. And essentially my argument is that the comics, in a very surprising way, parallel things that have been happening in the news since their inception, where basically zombies are allegorical stand-ins for illegal immigrants who are coming specifically from Mexico, and that the series itself is insisting upon the need for fences and borders and strong border security, because you have this mass of dangerous, dangerous, dirty swarms of people who are kind of mindless and are coming in to destroy the country. And it's up to Americans to try to stand their ground and fight them off. And like I say, I wrote like a 50-page paper on this, and I spent months and months and months of my life really researching this. I mean, these are just the comics, but as far as the amount of books that I read, it was literally, I've got pictures of it, which I could post on Twitter that like go up to about here. So my point here is, I'm not trying to rehash what I did my master's on. And so I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
But I literally could talk Walking Dead for months on end, which I basically did. I spent my life doing this for quite a number of months, where that's all I did every day. So I'll try to hold back.
All right. So my first introduction to The Walking Dead was with the AMC series. I had heard about it and I was really, really interested in checking it out. But I didn't end up seeing it when it first started airing. And then one of my friends at work, then he had the DVD of the first season, which was only, I think, 6 episodes. And so he let me borrow it. And so that way, then I got caught up with that. And then I managed to stay up to date with season 2, 3, 4, and so on. But yeah, the interesting thing about The Walking Dead, like the thing that sets it apart from a lot of other zombie stories, in my mind at least, is the idea that everyone is infected, and no matter how you die, you will turn into a zombie, or a walker in this case. Which is really, really interesting. I love that concept. But it's interesting because it plays a significant role for part of the series, but then it feels like it just kind of like goes away and it's not that much of an issue anymore.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah, it's
Well, I mean, Robert Kirkman himself has said that like, and this is where I don't know. I have no idea when I'm no longer being interesting to people and I'm just nerding out like crazy on this. But I kind of, as much as one person can know about The Walking Dead, I probably know it. And so because I've listened to almost, I think, like every recorded interview with Robert Kirkman, the writer of The Walking Dead. And he said basically that on the one hand, yes, he wanted to tell a zombie story because he loves zombie movies, and he wanted to, but his issue with zombie movies is that they ended, that they lasted for 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours, and he loved the zombie apocalypse concept, but then he's like, but then it was over, and either, you know, your protagonists, they all survive, or they all die, or some get away, but he's like, no matter how good or bad it is, and he found most of them very, very compelling, the problem is that they're finite, and he wanted to do essentially the never-ending story of the zombie apocalypse, that he doesn't want it to ever end. That's his, you know, conceit with this. This is his purpose. But then he's also said at the same time that the zombies are not the important part of the series, and he really wants to explore characters and themes about human beings, and not so much the zombie question, that he was kind of using it as an entry point to get into the dynamics and between characters, relationships with characters, and that for him, as it went deeper, like you do see this, that the zombies become less important certainly in the TV series. And because really the struggle becomes like, and you have multiple lines in both the comics and in the TV series about, we don't have to fear the walkers, they're a manageable threat, but it's people that we have to be concerned with, because you get first the governor, and then you have Negan, and then you have the war with the Whisperers. And I'm not trying to spoil it for people who haven't read the comics, and I know that the series is not quite there, but you're not really dealing with zombies in quite the same way as you were earlier in the series. That's where a lot of criticism has come in, that like a lot of the tension, a lot of the suspense, and a lot of the high concept aspect of the TV series has kind of disappeared, and it's turned into very much like my supervisor for my master's, the way he described it is it's very much melodrama, right? That it's like a soap opera, that it went from being an excellent horror story, and then, but the problem is, and it seems like this is an issue with horror in general, that if it goes on too long, it ceases to be horror and it becomes something else. That it seems very difficult, like, because then it's like it almost becomes cartoonish or like silly and overwrought how much agony you can put one person through. Like when you're looking at like what happens with Rick, then you're just like, at a certain point, you're just like, why is he continuing to live? Like, I mean, this dude has been through absolutely everything. I know that you don't watch Supernatural, but Supernatural does the same thing. Is it's just like, once you get these characters who have gone through every possible tragedy imaginable and all this misery, then it's like, and they continue to endure and they continue to survive, then it's no longer horrifying, because you're not so scared about what happens to these people. You just are kind of like, man, your life just sucks.
Yeah, it's interesting because it kind of there's also the aspect of like we were talking about in a previous podcast, where you can see the monster, 1, 2, 3 times, but after that, then it's not scary anymore. And there is an element of that as well, where like there gets to be a point where you're just like, okay, well, I get it. That's what the walkers are like, and you're just like, yeah, they're not scary anymore. It's not like, oh no, oh that's so gross and creepy and whatever. Like you're just like, all right, yep, that's expected. There's going to be some there, and
Yeah. And I mean, like, that is like, there are distinctions within the horror genre, between, like, because that to me is kind of the distinction between suspense and outright horror, because horror is not so interested in good horror shouldn't be trying to do jump scares. And it's like, suspense will give you a couple good jump scares, but they're legitimate. It's not like, oh, it was just a cat. It's like they're legitimately frightening scenes that you didn't quite see coming, like these moments. But horror is more like, when it gets into the concept of the effect of terror, you are looking straight at the monster. It's not in the shadows, it's not jumping out, and it continues to be frightening, right? And it's just, that's the idea behind, like, what would be closer to horror. And I mean, like, I think of slasher films tend to do this. A good example of this would be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. Like, at the end, it's like 45 minutes or so, like maybe not quite, but it feels like about half of the film is just, straight up Leatherface just going after the final girl. And it's like, you're not looking around the corner or whatever. It is just this relenting pursuit of her, and the monster is just there and there and there and there, and it's just so in your face, which is a very different approach to storytelling than suspense, which is you don't know where it is, and then it suddenly comes out. But you can't. Suspense, I don't think, works in an extended TV series like this.
Yeah.
But there are still interesting things that you could do with zombies that the show and the comics are just not doing.
Yeah, they're like kind of putting them in different locations, but at the same time, like, it's like I would love to see zombies in the snow, but that's not something that the show can do because of where it takes place. It takes place in Georgia, correct? Um,
Initially, it starts out in Georgia, but then they're spending the bulk of their time just south of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria. Alexandria is Northern
okay,
Virginia. It's like where like a lot of government workers live. It's like right on the edge with Maryland.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, still, because they are, like we're following uh, a set cast of characters, albeit a rotating one,
Hmm.
um, then we're locked down to wherever they are, and humans, by their nature, essentially want to settle down, right? Like they want to find one place where they can say, yes, this is home. This is where I'm safe, and so then yeah, like there's just kind of like we see them like we see Rick and the gang go to the prison, which is interesting for a little while, and then it gets tiring, and then something happens, and they have to leave, and they move on to Alexandria, and we see that kind of thing happen over and over. Um, but it's still not the kind of variation that I'm craving from the zombies. But they definitely have good uh good human villains, um with the governor and with oh my goodness,
Negan.
Negan. Negan, of course, and even the cannibals at I forget the name of the place,
Yeah.
um
Yeah,
but yeah.
that's actually, yeah, they're a really interesting group. Oh, at Terminus, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the
Oh.
comics and the TV series. No, it's just I'm thinking about the differences between the two, and like they did
Okay.
actually like quite different things with it, but both they're both good. Um, yeah, that there's so many interesting things to that. The cannibals as characters within this world. Um,
Yeah, I was actually really disappointed that that didn't go on longer in the series. It was like,
yeah,
oh, they're done with it?
it's really
Like that.
effective. It's such an interesting thing because, and it makes so much sense. Like in
Mhm.
terms of a theme where it's like you're battling like the monstrous thing about zombies is that they are essentially cannibals. They are humans who are consuming human flesh in order to survive, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
and then you have human characters who should have a sense of morality, but who are because of the zombies, then they have become something even more monstrous than the zombies themselves, where they are doing
Mhm.
the same thing as zombies, except they continue to have a conscience. And they're
Right.
still doing this. I can't remember. I think it's in the comics where they had, like killed their own children to eat them. Like,
Oh, man.
yeah, like it's
Yeah.
pretty brutal. And then when you're looking at that, you're like, well, that's certainly far more monstrous than these mindless zombies who are doing it, who are don't have to wrestle with the ethical or moral aspects of this.
Mhm.
The zombies are just a pure, like from a Freudian concept, just pure id, right? They want to consume, so they will consume, right? They just have
Right.
the desire to do it, and they will, with no conscience there. But then we have characters who do have a conscience who are just not
Yeah.
paralyzed by that, who are doing the same thing. It's monstrous.
Yeah. Yeah, and it that's one thing that I think the series, the TV series at least, did really well in the early days, at least, where it was people struggling with whether or not the walkers were monsters, whether they were
Yes.
different now that they had turned than they were. I mean, of course, Herschel and all the walkers in the barn is a huge aspect of that, but even Andrea and her sister,
Hmm.
um, yeah, like that was, it was difficult for her to to stab her sister in the brain, even once she turned into a walker, because it's like, well, she's still my sister, and it's like, well, is she though? um
The the best that you get is Morgan with his wife, where he cannot. Do you remember this?
Uh, oh, yes.
He
Yeah.
cannot leave the town because his wife is there, and the super fascinating thing is that even though he can't bring himself to kill her, even though she's already turned, but she continues to come to their house every night, and
Yeah.
she stands at the door even though there's nothing like really pulling her there, because it's like there's something way deep down that, but it's like it's this awful thing where it reminds you, it shows you that there is something buried way deep down, that of that person you loved, that is still in there,
Hmm.
but it's impossible to get out. And so it's like, do I kill that last vestige of her, right? Where there's just this teeny itsy bitsy part of her who continues to survive in that monstrous body. And am I really prepared to eliminate that entirely from existence? But at the same time, isn't this cruel, allowing her to live in this state? And how do you grieve when she's dead, but not really dead?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, I don't know how much you know about the the production of, like, the history of the production of the TV series, but the first two seasons, I think, undoubtedly are the strongest,
Mm.
and they've got the best moments overall, and it's because they were, like, I believe this firmly, and most critics would agree. It's because they were directed by Frank Darabont. He
Yeah.
was the head of the. I forget exactly what his role was. I imagine that he was the um, head writer for the show,
Mm.
and certainly the, like, co-creator. One of the co-creators for bringing it to television.
Right.
And I don't know how much
And
you know
and
about.
Frank Darabont, he was the director of the Shawshank Redemption, correct?
Correct. Yes. I
Yeah,
was going to
which
go
is a
over.
fantastic film.
Yeah, one of, like, the most at the time, like, when you look back on it, you're like, how did this get overlooked for critical awards, for one thing? And I mean, how did it just get overlooked in general?
Hmm.
It is a beautiful, beautiful film.
Absolutely.
There's so many wonderful things about it. So yeah, he did. I'll briefly go through his directing credits, because I think it's worth mentioning. Like, because The Walking Dead, in comparison to so much, um, B level horror that exists, or C or D or F level horror, where it's just like, it's not very good, right? When you're
Mhm.
dealing with a lot of horror is, and I'm not saying that it's not entertaining or that it doesn't have its fans, but it's like, when you're talking about something that it's like, the very best of horror can stand with the very best of any genre. Um,
Mhm.
uh, but there's a lot of bad. Just like within any genre, there's a lot of
Yeah.
bad. Like, there's a lot
Yeah.
of bad dramas that are just terrible. There's a lot of bad romance, some brilliant, some terrible,
Bad
sci-fi,
comedy.
comedy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like there's just, yeah, within any genre. It's not like that horror is, you know, worse than any other um, genre for this, but it gets kind of criticized for that. But he's stood above the rest. I mean, he started out. I don't know this film, The Woman in the Room. He did A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The
Hmm.
Blob from '88, The Fly 2, The Shawshank Redemption in '94, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, The Green Mile, because
Mm.
and those are both, like, both The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile are both Stephen King stories that he
Right.
did. The Majestic, uh, The Salton Sea, Collateral, The Mist, which is another Stephen King story. And The Mist, I know you haven't seen. We've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, and The Mist is so freaking good.
Right.
Um, and then, as far as, he got some uncredited writing works, including, so he was a script doctor for The Fan. I remember that, it's from '96. Eraser, I think that was with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Saving Private Ryan, he was a script
Oh
doctor
wow.
on that. Minority Report, Collateral, Godzilla from 2014, The Huntsman, Winter's War. And then, let me see. As far as television, he worked on Tales from the Crypt, Young Indiana Jones, The Shining from '97. I didn't even know that was a TV series. The Shield, Entourage, and then he got The Walking Dead.
Mm.
And what he does so well is he does a great job of making you care about characters.
Mhm.
Just
Absolutely.
he has got this, and the writing is so strong. The writing in the first two seasons of The Walking Dead is much, much better than it is in the comics.
Oh wow.
Like it really is. That there's tons of things that are done so much better. I mean, for instance, um, the whole thing of looking for Sophia, right? And how long that went on for. And then when she's been in the barn the whole time and she comes out, I challenge you to be unmoved by that, right?
Yeah.
And when Robert Kirkman was asked about that, because he doesn't do that in the comics, when he was
Mm.
asked about that, they're like, "What did you think of that?" He's like, "That was so freaking brilliant. I don't know what to say. I'm an idiot." He's just like, "What a missed opportunity." um,
Yeah.
like he like he really admired some of the stuff that was done in the TV series and the way it opens, like the way it opens in the TV series, the conversation between Rick and Shane is in their car, just about the difference between men and women, and in what could have been such a cliched, hackneyed scene, where like it was so well done. Like you find it, like it reminded me of like early Tarantino, with these
Mhm.
like great back and forths between two characters, and you're like, how are you making this so interesting? It is just two people talking and you're like
Right.
leaning in, you're like, wow, right? It's like it's remarkable dialogue.
Right.
And so like those first two seasons are just so well done, and he brought a lot more heart to the series than you get in the comics. The comics are really brutal. They're good, but there's not that same sentimentality. There's some, but it's like so grim and gritty in the comics, like this idea of you have to do whatever it takes to survive. But the TV series gets into the inner psychology of these characters in a
Yeah.
much more effective way. And they're both good, because I think the comics, they do things that are so brave and so challenging that I love. I'm not trying to spoil anything, but in the comics, like when you have the governor going after, when he's attacking them at the prison, right? Then you've got
Mhm.
Lori holding Judith, and then like they just like tear them apart with bullets. Like Judith doesn't survive in the comics, and it's like, and you
Wow.
see it, like you see her like it's so it's like, as far as like this unflinching look at the horror inflicted upon, like, of humans against other human beings, and this is not fantastical. Like if you look at something like some of the atrocities within human history, something like the Holocaust, then you're just like, horror, unlike almost any other genre, looks at this and doesn't blink. And so I think that Robert Kirkman, along with Charlie Adler, and then who else? Who's the other writer on this? Um, oh man, that's terrible that I can't remember. But Tony Moore is the one who first did the artist, and then it was Charlie Adler. What what you get in them is really challenging and really good horror. But then what you get with The Walking Dead, the TV series, and especially the Frank Darabont seasons, is you get really good drama as well.
Mhm.
And the show has tried so hard to maintain that and to reestablish that, and I think has failed every season since then to replicate it. They've had moments, they've had good
Yeah.
episodes here and there for sure, but nothing like what we've like what you get in the first two seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. There there are so many characters that are lost in the first two seasons
Yeah.
that you're just so like it's gut wrenching. Like Sophia is one of them, but I think Dale, my goodness, like his death. I'm pretty sure it was Dale, right? Um, who was like kind of like a mentor to
Yeah.
Glenn.
Yeah.
Yeah, his death was it was really I loved Dale. He was one of my favorite
He
characters
was like
at the
this
time.
voice of, like he was the one character who was saying we cannot lose our humanity in this world. Like he was kind of the
Yeah.
conscience of the show.
Yeah, and then when he was outvoted by everybody else, and then he just said, "I can't stay here and be
Right.
part of this," and he
Right.
walks away, and that's how he died, and he was just like, "Oh my goodness!" Like it was so sad, and the fact that all the other characters went, "We have to respect his last wish," like that
Right.
is so good, and that is compelling character drama. It's not about the walkers or anything like that. Like it is driven purely by how well written the characters are,
Right.
um, and the drama between them. Um, so there are also a lot of characters who are written specifically for the TV series.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
For example, the I believe the Dixon brothers
Yep.
were both, which I mean, Daryl is one of the most revered characters from the series. Like
Absolutely.
everybody seems to love him. Norman Reedus, his portrayal is fantastic, and it's just
Yes.
like I have actually heard people say like if they ever kill off Daryl, then I'm gonna stop watching the show
Right.
because like people just love him that much. Um, and the characters that you've got in the later seasons that are original. I mean, I'm not sure how many of them are even because I feel like they've kind of backed away from that and started just being like, no, we're just gonna try to introduce more characters from the comics that weren't that didn't come in earlier.
Right.
Like I think oh man, there's the one character um oh my goodness, I'm totally blanking on his name, but a lot of people were upset that he wasn't in the first two and a half seasons, I think. And then he ended up being brought in, and some people were asking about, I think T Dog. They were
Yes.
like, "Oh, is T Dog supposed to be that
It's
character? Just whenever he
Tyrese. Tyrese is the
Tyrese."
character that you're thinking of. And yeah, and I thought that too. Like when I was watching the show, I'm like, wait, yeah, what is his name? T-Dog? Is that it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, is T-Dog supposed to be because it's like T, so is that supposed to be
Yeah.
Tyrese? And then it's like, oh, no, it's not, because then they did actually bring in Tyrese. Um,
Right. But then
and
Tyrese got killed off
yeah,
like fairly soon after.
yeah, he wasn't in the TV series for too long. And even characters who are in the TV series are not the same in the comics. Like they're very, very different. Like Andrea is much more, or Andrea, Andrea is much more like Carol in the comics, where
Hmm.
she's tough, she's a badass, and her and Rick then they have a romantic relationship, and it's not the same character. Like she has the same name between the two, but it's like even like characters like that, they don't perfectly overlap.
Right. Yeah, the romantic relationships in the TV series, I have to say, sometimes they're just awful. Like, I don't know. Rick and Michonne being put together, it very much felt like it was done like by committee. like by
Mm.
like, oh, fans really like those two together. Let's make them a couple. And I think that one is one of the better ones. But
Hmm.
I think it's at the beginning of this season that you find out that Ezekiel and Carol are a couple, and I'm like, what the? Where did that come from? And it was just
I
really
don't
weird to
know.
me.
They've been established. They've been setting that up for a while.
Well, I don't know, like Carol and Daryl, everybody had wanted,
Yes.
and they had like a relationship for a long time, and then it just sort of fizzled or something. Like I don't even know like when they officially like broke up or whatever. Like it was, I don't know. So that's just what like took me out of it. um, but yeah, I don't know. I felt like that one came out of it kind of came out of nowhere with Carol and Ezekiel. Because like they had a very clear moment of like, okay, look, they're kissing now in the first episode of this season, which is the only
Hmm.
one that I've seen. But it was like, okay, so you really want us to know that they're a couple now, I guess. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but like you do see this with Ezekiel where he doesn't want like she goes off to this like she tries to be off on her own and he won't
Mm,
leave her alone and he continues like having people go and check on her, then he goes and checks on her and she's kind of like pushing him away, but she obviously does appreciate the attention, but she's just so broken at this point that she can't really handle it.
mm.
um if you look at the couple seasons leading up to this, they he is doting on her.
Okay.
He is paying very close attention to her, and I to me it doesn't come out of nowhere. I think they did establish it. It's but this is like where I feel like you can lose sight of it is that this is my big criticism, and this ties into what you're talking about. My big criticism of the last few seasons, and this really is a question that I think it's a good storytelling question that they don't seem, I don't know if this has to do with contracts or if this just has to do with dealing with this massive cast of characters, but the the way they've been approaching it more often than not is each character kind of gets their own episode.
Hmm.
um, and you don't see the interactions between a lot of characters until you get like you kind of get that with season premieres and then like a mid-season finale, then a mid-season premiere, and then the season finale. But then like pretty much you can count on it that the 6 episodes in between or so, what you're going to get is you're going to get standalone episodes of following one character, and it's infuriating for me because then you end up not seeing other characters for like 4 or 5 weeks at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of your favorite characters.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then sometimes you get an entire episode where you're like, well, there was a cliffhanger at the end of the last episode, and now we're just spending time with this other character that I don't care about. Why am I even watching this episode?
Yeah.
Um,
The
yeah,
go-
it's very frustrating. I know that you have a specific example, correct?
I do. I mean, like I'll get to my example in a minute here, like where it tries to be crazy, but the some of the episodes work better than others. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is such an
Hmm.
interesting question, and oh, by the way, I just came up with an idea for another podcast. Lost. We need to do that.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I've
Yeah.
got it right here. And but the reason why I'm thinking of Lost is because Lost did this, but Lost did this in a much more satisfying way. Is that
Hmm.
you would have an for each episode, it would kind of go into a little bit more of the backstory of each character off the island, their life before they got there, right?
Yeah.
And then as the series went on, then you start seeing them kind of in the future once they're off the island. And, like, and so, but you continue to have everything else that's going on the island in your B storyline, right? You'd have your A story and then your B story within the episode, and often you would have like sometimes they would have a C story as well. But like you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
yeah, from a storytelling perspective, then it's like it was effective because you needed a lot of backstory. And so how else are you going to do this other than, learning? And the reason why it works so well on Lost is because it's a mystery. You want to find out who on earth are these characters who are all on this island. But you're not talking about backstories that we're getting with The Walking Dead. You're just, you suddenly are following a character and
You're
then
following C stories.
yeah, you absolutely are following C stories for one thing. And I suspect that I could be wrong, and you probably know more about this than I do, but does that have to do with contracts? Are they paying the actors per episode? Like if they don't show up in an episode, does that mean that they're not getting paid?
Yeah, I'm not.
Or are
sure
they getting
about
paid just outright, like a flat rate for the season? Because I don't know, and this like I'm not letting my ignorance stop me from speculating, but it sure feels like what they're doing is they can't afford to pay all of the actors to be in 16 episodes a season. And so instead, it's like, we're going to give you, like somebody like Andrew Lincoln, I'm sure is getting like however many millions per episode. And then it's like, but if you can have an episode or two where you don't have him, then you're going to save yourself like $2 million right there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that is the case. I mean, another thing is how much the actors want to be on the show. I know that The Simpsons, over the past, I don't know how many years, whenever they have a contract dispute, then the actors are always saying, we want more time to be able to do other projects. And Fox is just saying, no, you can't have that. Like, you have to be locked down with us.
Right.
And they're like, but we want to do other things. It's not like we're saying that we're leaving.
Right.
And I think that probably does have some effect as well. I mean, Norman Reedus has done a number of other projects. The one that comes to mind specifically is the upcoming video game by Hideo Kojima. So Death Stranding, which looks really, really good. But he's like the main character of the game. And I'm sure that he's thrilled by that opportunity. And that's something that he would need a lot of time to be able to do, because like it's all like motion capture and everything.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
Like,
yeah.
So
yeah.
So yeah, I'm wondering like how much effect that has as well. Not to say that the actors are getting tired of their roles on The Walking Dead, but actors in general want, some level of freedom and
I
variety.
think a lot, right? But I do think they actually, like many of them, whether they have said it publicly or not, are tired because, again, I don't know how much you know about the production of the show, but they're filming this in Georgia in the summer, and like that sweat is not CGI. I mean, like you're talking about like sweltering conditions where it's like, even if you do have an air-conditioned trailer that you can be in between scenes, like when like you're not shooting like your character, you're still talking about hours outside in the sun for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of most people, like if you have an office job, like you've got better working conditions than the actors on The Walking Dead. Like you've got an air conditioned environment, and these people are not like they're not, like I say, it's not like they're filming in like Michigan or something like that in July where it's like, sure, it gets hot, but it is not like the deep south, like with the humidity and the heat. Like it's pretty brutal, because then the stuff that they're getting them to do is like, okay, you're running around, you're like going through this forest, and we got to do that again, we got to do it again, we got to do it again. It's they're not. It's not a lot of work on sound stages.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And so I imagine some of them are tired of that. But that's where I get frustrated with what the show is doing, is that like you've introduced this massive ensemble cast, but then it's like they have no idea what the hell to do with it. And even if you're binge watching it, you're still talking about sometimes 4 or 5 hours without seeing Carol. And she was in like every single episode in the first couple seasons. And so then
Mhm.
you're like, this is one of the original characters, and there are very few original characters left on the series. Very few, like a handful. I think, like you can count them on one hand at this point,
Yeah.
especially with Rick going. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
Rick and Carl. And so, I
Yeah.
mean, like, who are you talking about anymore? You're talking about Carol. You're talking about Daryl.
Yeah.
Morgan, if
Uh,
you kind of count him as an original character because he was there, but then he wasn't really on the series for quite a few seasons.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
two and a
A
half,
good,
let's
like
say.
5 seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, unless
Yeah.
unless I'm forgetting a major one, but like off the top of my head, you're talking about 2.5 characters who are left.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's about right. And people will correct us in the comments if
And that's
if we
fine if they
forgot
do, but I'm
somebody.
saying there's not very many who are left.
Yeah.
But you can miss a relationship, like the subtle little hints between Carol and Ezekiel becoming closer, having some connection, when you don't see her for, as far as screen time, sometimes 4+ hours. And so it's
Yeah.
like you can miss that subtle little thing that they did between her and Ezekiel, because like you've essentially just watched like 3 movies in between. Like if you're
Right.
talking about the running time. So it's like, well, how the hell am I supposed to like remember all these subtle little hints that you're dropping if you're not, bringing them up swiftly enough, like, or soon after, like.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, so like I don't like that they don't seem to know what to do with those characters
Mhm.
having this big cast, and they also don't seem to know what to do when you're dealing with so many characters being spread out all over the place. And then I suspect that the contracts, in order that they just don't have the budget to continue to check in with all the different characters every week. But it's very frustrating as a viewer, because when you're watching, you will occasionally get, you, like, I know that an episode will start and then you're just like, oh, great, we're stuck with this character for a solid hour. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like, and you were talking, like, you had kind of alluded to it before. Like, the one that, like, I think is like the biggest sin within this show, the one that I find most offensive, is the episode that follows Tara and her
Mhm.
going to the land of women. Um,
Yeah.
like, which is an original community that you don't
Mm.
have in the comics. And so you could do a lot of interesting stuff with it, but like,
Mhm.
I find her to be just the most uh, frustrating character to watch on screen out of all of the Walking Dead. I mean, there's been a few, but who have kind of bugged me, but her more than anybody else, because to have the writers think that she's really charming and that she's really funny and witty, and we're just like, Tara, you're such a stitch. And it's like, it, she's not funny. Like, it's very obvious that they want us to laugh at all the things that she does. Like, she is, kind of like, I don't know, any character from Guardians of the Galaxy who's like providing, do you know what I mean? They think that she's saying
Yeah.
lines like this, and all of them fall flat. Like, she hasn't made me laugh once,
Mhm.
but it's very obvious I'm supposed to be laughing for one thing. That's what bugs me about her. Um,
Yeah.
and they could have done interesting stuff because she had joined up. Like, she was originally in Woodbury with the governor, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then like she realizes, oh, he's a monster and I can't like follow him. So it's like there's tons of interesting things that they could do, but even just like little stupid things, like the actress who plays Tara, she continues to put on weight every season of the show, but they continue to talk about the fact that she's starving. Like, she's like, I haven't had food. They're like, when she gets to the land of women, like, it's been years since I watched this episode, but they're like, oh, like, are you hungry? Or have you had anything to eat? And she's like, in the last 5 days, I think I've had a pack of soy sauce. Does that count? But it's like, she's fatter than she was in the last episode. I'm not, and I
Yeah.
don't like, I this is not like, fat shaming or body shaming or anything like that. Just write it into the show. Like they did it on Lost with Hurley, where Hurley maintained, like, he was very overweight, the actor who plays Hurley. And
Mm.
it's like all that they did was they like established he's been sneaking food like on the
Yeah.
island, like in the hatch, like he like literally just like he like continued to eat and he was hoarding it, and like he feels really guilty about it, but you're like, oh, okay, that's how come he's not losing weight unlike other people on the show, and like why
Yeah.
they're on this island. And he like just write it into the show, but don't act like this woman is like on the verge of starvation. Like if if the actress herself either cannot or will not lose weight, and I don't know, I have no idea like if there are health issues or like a pregnancy or anything like that. I have no idea. I'm not saying that you have to be thin to be on The Walking Dead, but you have to account for why a character puts on like 30 pounds from within like maybe 2 years of the zombie apocalypse, and nobody else is gaining weight.
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, it's the equivalent, I guess, to if one if you took one character and then changed out the actor, but they were like, I don't know, like completely, let's say a different skin tone, right? So like the actor was like originally black and then they're all of a sudden white in the next season, and you're just like, wait, this is supposed to be the same character? I don't understand. Like it's
Right.
just like it doesn't, there's no logic between like the connection there between like why.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like you have to like I don't know. I just think that the writers believe that a character like Tara is way more of a fan favorite than she actually
Mm.
is, and like sh everything they try to get her to do just doesn't make sense to me. I don't have sympathy for her as a character. I don't find her interesting, and she's not funny. Like I don't understand. Like you don't really get like the only character in the comics who's kind of like that, which they do in the show, is Eugene, where Eugene is funny, but he's funny without trying to be funny. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
he's funny because he's trying to sound incredibly intellectual
Yeah.
and at the same time very redneck. And
Yes. Yeah.
and so it's like
It's funny. Eugene is the perfect example of what I would want the Big Bang Theory to be.
yeah, that's a very funny. You got to tweet that. That's a very incisive comment. I like that. Yeah,
The characters who like, like they think they're really intelligent, but they're not pulling it off.
right, right, exactly. Yeah, I like that a fair bit. Um, yeah, and so I don't know how you feel about like I think the ratings have been declining on The Walking Dead for a couple
Mm,
years now, and most critics have been saying like the show is, at times outright dreadful. Like it's laughably bad at times.
yeah.
Um, and because you have before you had a pretty realistic show considering that you're dealing with the Walking Dead with the zombie apocalypse, right? That
Mhm.
it's very much it's kind of similar to our last discussion where it's like within the Batman universe, it's kind of the Walking Dead is like the Dark Knight of zombie fiction, where
Yeah.
most zombie fiction is either ridiculously like schlocky and over the top with like how gross it is, but you don't really have very believable characters,
Mhm.
or it's kind of comedic because you've got tons of comedic takes on zombies, whether you're talking about like Zombieland or
Shaun of the
what
Dead.
Shaun of the Dead, and what's the one on Netflix with Drew Barrymore? Something Diet,
Santa Clarita Diet.
Santa
Yeah.
Clarita Diet, right? Like you get a lot of like, and I mean like the list goes on and on.
Mhm.
Most zombie fiction is either like funny or kind of campy,
Mhm.
like Z Nation. I've watched a few episodes of that, and it's much more campy. Right? It doesn't take itself anywhere near as seriously as The Walking Dead does, and The Walking Dead is it kind of stands alone as that one take on the zombie apocalypse that is trying to be as realistic as possible. And that's why I get frustrated with a character like Tara, where I'm just like, this doesn't fit with what you've already established. And then, you have like the stupid people, the garbage pail people, like where like they don't make any sense. Like
Yeah.
their own like made up version of English doesn't make any sense. This isn't Mad Max. Like the zombie apocalypse hasn't been going on for generations, for millennia, where it's like they've created their own dialect. It's like it's been like within the story universe like 3 years.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so
that's actually another thing that gets to be a little frustrating is, seeing characters age. And I mean, like, it's not something that they can help on the show, right? Because you've got actors who are aging, but like they're growing up and everything, and you're just like, wait, hasn't it only been like a week since last season?
Exactly. And I mean, like that, it's one of those things where it's like, I think you have to be a little, there has to be some suspension of disbelief, like that is fairly intentional on the viewer's part. That it's like the show has to, like the writers on the show, the director, the costume design, set design, they have to do everything they possibly can to help us get there where we can suspend our disbelief. But there is a little bit when you're looking at this going, okay, just go with it. I know it's a little bit frustrating that like Carl is now like 20 years old, but like Judith is still like not even a toddler. Right? Like, so you have to just go, he's really only 15, even though he's clearly 20 years old, right? Like you have to try to do that. But there are things that they could do that would make it a little bit easier, like I say, like don't put lines in there about Tara like literally like being on the verge of death from starving when she's putting on weight. Like just don't put that line in there and we're probably okay. And maybe you do need to like write off somebody like Carl, which they ended up doing, which as far as I understand still has not happened in the comics. That kind of gets around it, and you can look at it and say like, yeah, the character's really looking old, but that I think in the zombie apocalypse, like you age in dog years, like for every 1 year, that's like 7 years because of the stress and turmoil that you're being put through. So it kind of does make sense that they're looking as old as they are. But they can make it easier for us to suspend our disbelief, and they're just not.
Yeah. So the other thing that I'd like to talk about is, does it feel like the show is still made to be watched once a week, or is it more binge, like geared toward binge watching? Because I feel like, I don't know. I feel like originally, like this ties into this whole discussion of like having specific episodes about specific characters. But yeah, like the first season, you could binge watch it, and it's all one story, and you just feel like that was the most satisfying 6 hours I think I've ever spent.
Totally, 100%.
But then. But then now I feel like they're setting up so much for each episode to have one set piece and like one set of like zombies and everything. And then of course they're able to talk about it on The Talking Dead.
Yes,
which is a whole other discussion.
Yes, it is. Okay, yeah. let's just put that over here for now. Yeah.
Yes. We'll have a Talking Dead episode.
Yeah. I really like that idea, actually. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But yeah. So it does feel more so now than ever that each episode they're trying to be like, okay, well, yeah, you have to get the walkers in there at one point, and let's do them in in a grocery store now,
Yeah.
or or in a swamp or whatever, and they're just like throwing like, okay, what's a different type of zombie encounter that we haven't done yet? Let's just put that into one of the episodes, and it doesn't even connect
No.
to what the episode is about. So I feel like they've gone more episodic at the same time as stretching out their story arcs, which is
That's
so weird because it's like you've got the Negan storyline, which
mhm.
takes what, like 3 seasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and you're just like I didn't even realize like how long it was going on for, but like when you step back, you're like, oh man, that was going on for a while.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like nothing is really happening between Negan and Alexandria for the longest time. It's frustrating because it feels like, well, I want to binge watch it so that I can get that whole arc all at
Yep.
once,
Yep.
but it's painful.
It is very painful. It's very frustrating to watch. This is my like I think everything you said is really insightful, and I haven't thought about it that way. So I really like that. I think that is ultimately like it's fascinating. Like how can a show that is s- using a narrative approach that is so overtly serial, where it's like
Yep.
you cannot watch it in a random order. You have to watch it in this order for it to make sense. And you're talking about this big story arc. We'll go for like maybe another 5-10 minutes or so, and
Yeah.
we will try to stick to that.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about this big story arc that you have to like follow, it's like how the hell is it possible that it doesn't function like that and it now is episodic? Because that's exactly what it feels like. And yeah,
and
so okay, I
and
want to
other shows have suffered with that as well. I know that like the X-Files is more or less infamous for that, where they'll
yeah.
have like overarching stories, but each episode is its own thing. But The Walking Dead is like it's kind of the opposite of most shows. Most shows start episodic and then grow to be serial once they've gained
Yes.
this big fan base. But The
Yes.
Walking Dead is going the exact opposite way.
You're 100% right. And the interesting thing about it is that you have okay, let me kind of back up here.
Mhm.
When you're talking about the first season, um, and it being maybe the best 6 hours you could ever spend, like watching something, like
Yeah.
that is basically my experience. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but this is like how I was introduced to The Walking Dead. I kind of heard about it as far as like comics, and I'm like, all right, that kind of sounds interesting. Um, and then I heard there's a TV show, and I'm like, all right, that sounds interesting. And I knew about Netflix being a streaming service. This is 2011. And so I said to my wife, uh, I really think that we should consider getting Netflix. And then she's like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know if it's good or not, but it says 1 month free trial. So if we don't like it, that's fine. And
Yeah.
we'll try it for a month. And if it's just no good, then we just won't continue with it. So we get Netflix, and like I get the credit card out, and then I see the show The Walking Dead. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was on this thing called Netflix. And then I hit play at maybe 10 p.m. and then it's like 3:45 in the morning. My wife comes out. She's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm like, "It's the zombie apocalypse. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm not coming to bed." Like, and so for
Yep.
me, my first real experience with Netflix, my first real experience binge watching something is The Walking Dead. And it's like, those two things of like binge watching The Walking Dead and like that approach to television. It's like
Yeah.
that's my they're so permanently intertwined in my own, experience that it's like it's hard to imagine where the show has gotten to at this point because I sure don't feel that way about it anymore. And I think part of what's happened is if you're looking, so this is where I'm coming back to that point from before. The X-Files, or another good example of this is Supernatural, because they're both sort of horror stories, horror television, just like The Walking Dead. Like, the X-Files is horror science fiction, and but Supernatural is a horror story. And so you have what are called the Monster of the Week stories. And so you
Right.
basically get part of the big story arc. So you get an episode of that, and then you get maybe 2 or 3 monsters of the week where they're just kind of one-offs, and they might have 2 or 3 minutes within that episode that touches on that big overall story arc, but it's not really important. And like people, like fans have done guides where they're saying, if you just want the big story arc, watch this episode, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. And then you
Yeah.
can watch all of the X-Files and get that big story arc, and you can kind of skip, like you can just excise or omit all of those Monster of the Week stories. Same
Mhm.
thing with Supernatural. You can do the same thing each season, and sometimes it'll span over 2 seasons, but it's typically you've got your story arc for the one season, and it's like,
Mhm.
here's the big bad foe that is going to be hanging over this entire season, and you still have Monsters of the Week within there where they're just kind of one-off episodes. And this does work pretty well, but it is very much a traditional approach to television, and it doesn't do very well when you're talking about binge watching something, because
Mhm.
binge watching something, uh, binging a TV series has changed the way storytelling works. Um,
Yeah.
and so The Walking Dead to me seemed like the perfect show for binge watching, because what it is you have uh, it's such a serialized show, and there is no monster of the week.
Yeah.
And every single episode has dire stakes involved for every single character, and you feel like you're watching every episode, and it's like every single character could die. Aside from Rick, then
Right.
you know that any character could die at any point in any episode, and the characters themselves have no plan. They have no idea what they're doing to survive. And
Mhm.
then the show has gotten into this problem because, like, season one, they didn't have really a place to stay. Then season two, you get to the farm, and then I think it's season three that you get to the prison.
Mhm.
But then all of these, or maybe season three was still on the farm. I can't remember.
No,
But
yeah, I think the farm was overrun at the end of season 2.
okay.
Um,
So you have no safe space, and then a place that seems kind of safe but not really, and then a place that does seem pretty safe but then it's not at all, and then you get to Alexandria, and it's like, as they've gotten to progressively more safe spaces to live, then you end up essentially getting Monsters of the Week.
mhm.
And it's like, well, we need to delay, like, where it's ultimately heading. It's like they're going to have this ultimate big battle because it's going to be the season finale. And it's
Yeah.
like, but you need to give this character a task. So get this character, all right, we need to get the guns. You have to go over there. And it's like, well, now this is just a standalone episode of like that character, that group of character going and getting the guns. And then it's like, well, ultimately at the end of it, they're probably going to get them. And so you just like, you stalled in your storytelling for 60 minutes,
Mhm.
where you just took us out of the big story arc because you're giving them these like menial tasks along the way, and it's like, go and follow that character. I mean, like, that's exactly what happened with Tara and going to the land of the women. Then it's like, well, we need guns, so you go off and go and find some. Okay. So then it's like, so then we get to spend an hour with Tara, and it's just like, I don't want an hour with her. You know,
Yeah.
I want all the characters, and you're slowing the story down, and it's like it
Mhm.
feels forced. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like this is what would happen i- to a realistic group of characters.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that The Walking Dead, it was so good in those first couple seasons. I mean, people complained about the second season being too long or whatever.
But that's only because
But
they hadn't seen season 7 or 8 at that point.
yeah.
They were complaining at the time. I don't think anybody would complain now in comparison.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yes, I do know what you mean. It does kind of stall compared to the first season. Yeah.
Mhm. Um, but but yeah, it's I don't know, it's just really frustrating to see the series go downhill like this, and it feels like the first couple seasons were probably written by just a handful of people,
Hmm.
all at the same time. Like it was written as a season,
Yep.
and now it feels like the writers are being told, okay, well, this is where it's going to end up.
Yep.
But can you write a story that takes place in between these two?
That's
And
exactly it. Yeah.
and it's so frustrating because it's
Yeah.
just like, well, I don't care about that. Like, that's not why I got interested in the series in the first place.
Exactly.
Like, I'm still watching the series, like obviously not actively. Now I just wait for it to come on Netflix, but
Right. Right.
but it's just because I get so frustrated by watching it week by week
Me
and just
too.
being like, oh, this episode I really don't care about. Like,
Yep.
oh, like, okay, this is more vamping, like just more.
It is. I know it so much of it feels like a student who's required to make like a 10-minute presentation and they don't know how to fill 10 minutes. So they're trying to stall as much as they can in the middle. They're like, and now I'm gonna play a song that relates to the topic. And they just play like a 3-minute song. And they're just standing there, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like that's what it feels like. It just feels like, all right, we have to get through 8 episodes within this half season, and this is going to be the beginning, and this is going to be the end. We got to fill 6 hours in the middle. What are
Yeah.
we going to do? And it also feels like we don't have really the budget that we need to put a whole
Mhm.
lot of action in there. So you know there's going to be no crazy action sequences, no battles. Like you're just like, "Oh, okay, you can plot it." Like I mean, I can tell you like for next season, it's like it's going to do this. Season premiere and then the lull, mid-season finale. And then mid-season premiere, and then that lull, and then
Yeah.
season finale. So you know automatically going in, I'm going to be bored out of my mind for the 6 episodes in between the season premiere and the mid-season finale. Like
Yeah.
every time. So it's become predictable. And it's not just that you've it's it's not that the first couple seasons work well because they focus more on the zombies. The first couple seasons work well because they're unpredictable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really like compare it to Game of Thrones. Like I haven't watched Game of Thrones or read the books or anything like that, and I know that's a whole discussion in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, but the way that Game of Thrones, I mean, it's HBO. They have all the money. Like they
Yeah.
spend like tens of millions of dollars per episode.
Right.
Um, and they're just, you know, they're these incredible, like such high production values that they're able to do these, you know, amazing action scenes in every episode and all sorts of things like that, in addition to keeping that all that all the drama
Right.
of the characters.
Right.
And it's
And
it's frustrating because like The Walking Dead started that way, and at the time AMC was like I saw AMC and I was like, oh my goodness, okay, it's got to be good. It's AMC.
yeah.
They know how to do like these expansive, you know, movie level stories
Yeah.
for these shows, and
Yeah.
with this huge budget and everything like that, it looked amazing. And not that The Walking Dead looks bad now, but there are clearly
Some of it does.
budgetary, well,
Yeah.
yeah, but there are clearly budgetary constraints that are wearing on them. And yeah, like the cast being more well respected, I mean, like, or yeah, like more well known is certainly affecting their budget, where it's
Yeah.
like, well, do we want to pay this actor for another season, or
Right.
um yeah, so it's just it's really frustrating, and it also feels like I don't know how accurate it is, but it feels like they're just like, we're catching up to the comics and we don't want to catch up with the comics,
Oh,
so
yeah, I think
let's
there's
try
a
to
sense.
stretch this out more.
Yeah.
um
as somebody who was reading the comics while at the same time watching the show, and I've talked to other people who are doing the same thing, they're earlier on, like seasons 2 and 3, there's a little bit of concern amongst us who are doing this, going, they might be going too fast. Like, what's going to happen if they outpace the comics, which is exactly what's happened with Game of Thrones.
Right.
But yeah, but it definitely feels like they've pulled way back, and
Yeah.
they've slowed it way down. And I don't. The Walking Dead just could work so well by saying the comics and the TV series are already doing different things. Like, you
Yeah.
have different characters. I mean, Rick hasn't had a hand in The Walking Dead. He literally is like one-handed because the governor cut off his hand within like 2 pages of meeting him, just like whack, and then the hand gets cut off. And so like Rick the whole time is like, I mean, like you can see on the cover here, like, can you see that? Like, he's got bandages wrapped around his right hand, so he's having to shoot with his left the whole time. And like the TV series has kind of like given little hints about that, like at times, like, we're going to chop off his hand, he's going to lose his hand, but then they never actually do. It's like, they're doing totally different stuff, and not just like that's a minor thing, but it's like they have characters,
and it's also a budgetary thing.
Of course. Well, I mean, Robert Kirkman, he said this. I mean, the whole chopping off of Rick's hand is like a hilarious kind of thing, because he said it seemed like a good idea at the time, and I immediately regretted it. But how do you give a guy a hand back? It's so funny to me, because he's like, it seemed like such an exciting thing to do. It's like, it says everything about the governor, and it's so like mind blowing, because it's pretty early in the comics when it happens. And then he's like, the governor, he's just a psycho who just literally chops off Rick's hand. And you're just like, what? And as I was reading it, I definitely felt that way. And then he's like, oh no, what have I done? He can't even button his own shirt. If he has a button shirt, he's like, damn it. But still, he's like, I thought it would be easy enough to do, because like it's way easier to draw a stump for my artist than it is to draw fingers. But then he's like, this is terrible. Anything that involves 2 hands, my main character, my hero of the story can't do it. It's like,
climb the ladder? Nope.
No. It's like, yeah, like what would stop Rick? Like what's one thing Rick can't do? I don't know, applaud. Like, there's so, you know, there's so many things he can't do. But you have characters in the TV show who don't exist in the comics, and vice versa. You have now communities,
different,
and who are different characters. Like, even though they have the same name, like you have whole communities, like the garbage people, the land of the women. You've got these communities where it's like, oh, like that's not the same as, like, they're unique to the show, but they seem stuck in this position of trying to make it like the comics, but doing a bad job of adapting and doing a bad job of being original. And I know that Game of Thrones, I'm not entirely caught up. I've read, I think, the first 4 books, and I've seen the first 2 seasons. I think that's exactly where I'm at. The first 4 books and the first 2 seasons. But Game of Thrones, they are adapting a much more difficult text to the screen, because you're talking about like 1,000-page books, and then you're trying to reduce it to a single TV season. Whereas the Walking Dead comics, there's not a lot of dialogue because they're comics, and it's already working in a visual medium. So they're already storyboarding in some ways. Like, it's not exactly storyboarding, but it's a hell of a lot closer to storyboarding than a novel. And certainly a 1,000-page epic fantasy novel, right? And yet Game of Thrones seems to be doing a much better job of satisfying fans of both the books and just of the TV series, and people who like both. Like, and I don't get it.
Yeah. So we really do have to wrap this up.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll finish with that, and I think we should
yeah.
do more on this, because
Yeah.
there's a whole lot more to get into. But yeah, that was a good like first dive into The Walking Dead.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how we kind of started strong and then ended miserable, just like the series.
Yeah, it's true.
We're like, yeah, it's so great. Never mind.
I know, and that is the thing. Like, yeah, because I mean, like, I'll say this: if like, I mean, okay, let me ask you this, and then this will be it. Let me just ask you: with AMC announcing, I believe they announced that they're going to do 3 films. Andrew Lincoln is no longer on the show. You've got Fear the Walking Dead that now exists, which is completely apart from the comics, and The Walking Dead itself, despite declining ratings and critical panning, the show is still making the money. Do you have hope for the show? Do you think that this is going to, and for the franchise in general?
Uh, I I don't really have hope. My main hope at the moment is that they'll give it a satisfying ending. That's all I'm hoping for. Like, I don't want it to go on much longer. I want it to end sooner before it gets worse. In terms of like the movies with Andrew Lincoln, like I don't know. Again, like if they can give it a satisfying ending, like a satisfying conclusion, then sure, it could be really good. But I don't know. I'm not terribly hopeful. In terms of Fear of the Walking Dead, I understand that they are. I think that they sent Morgan over to that series, or planning to, or something.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, because they were like, oh, he doesn't really have a place in Rick's group anymore, so we're just gonna send him over to Fear the Walking Dead where he'll fit in better. That's what I've heard, but I'm not 100% on that. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I, I I think that it's exactly like a zombie apocalypse. Like, it starts out really, really crazy and like, oh man, there's so much going on, and it's just slowly dying out. And I
Mm.
just want to see a good ending, you know? I don't know.
They're in a very unusual position. I mean, sort of like a soap opera, where there are soap operas that have been on TV for like 40 something years and they're just always going to be on TV. And
Yeah.
then like they're kind of in that position, but we've never seen it within this genre before of horror or like primetime television. Like you see it
Hmm.
during daytime television, but not primetime television. And
Hmm.
um, because Robert Kirkman, he's said essentially, like, I mean, not essentially, he has said that unless anything changes, like, he doesn't ever plan to stop writing this, that this is just
Right.
going to go on forever. Because, and I admire that artistically. I'm like, it's like, that's crazy. Like, how ambitious is that? And how kind of fun is that? And he's like, as long as Rick is still going, I'm going to keep following this story. And that's kind of what he said. That's the only indication that he's given that this series would end, is basically until Rick breathes his last, then it's not going to be done. But then other people have kind of speculated, kind of like what you have, like, this is a whole other thing that very few people will get the reference to, but kind of like in Reboot, where it's like Enzo, like grizzled old man Enzo, like
Hmm.
that. It's like some people have said that's what's going to happen with Carl, is it's going to be like Rick will die
Right.
and then you're just going to jump forward and it's going to be grizzled old man Carl, who's like, you know what I mean, like he's like 40 and like he's like,
Yeah.
oh, like my dad died 30 years ago and blah blah blah, like, and like
And
he'll keep
talking to his
going.
kids about back before all this started.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like some people have speculated that that's what would happen, but it's like I don't know what the TV series does when you have that, when it's like the source material is not going to give you an ending. And I think that interest amongst fans, like the ratings, I think are going to die well before the comic sales are going to die. I think the comic sales are going to keep going way longer than keeping millions and millions of viewers on The Walking Dead. In part because of the people who are like Scott Gimple, amongst others, like the showrunners, they don't seem to have, maybe they have a vision for the show, but it sure doesn't feel like it. Not the kind of vision that Frank Darabont had. And yeah, so it's, I mean, I don't know. I'm basically answering my own question. What do I think? Am I optimistic for the future of the franchise, especially like for television? Because the comics is a whole other question. But as far as for television with The Walking Dead and not Fear the Walking Dead, I think we are going to see maybe an unprecedented decline in quality. This is going to get like so bad, it's going to get ugly. Like I think it's already been doing that, where it's like started here and it's just been like kind of doing this with a little couple blips along the way.
Yeah.
But I think this is going to be a train wreck.
Yeah. No, I think that if it does continue this way, then you're going to see more and more of the established cast, leaving the show for one reason or another.
Which is basically already happened.
Right.
There's almost no one left. So it's almost becoming a whole other show, but a really bad show.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's I think that's just going to keep happening until like nobody's interested in any of the characters on the show.
Exactly.
Then, it's just going to end at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will end, which is so sad that I'm saying that, but it's like it's the show itself is a zombie. It's just like, this isn't that thing that I loved. There's no sign of it left. It's like I fell in love with this thing that was like vibrant and compelling, and now this is like boring and predictable, and it's like
there's still something
in there. That's actually kind of a brilliant thing that it's doing. It itself is becoming a zombie. All right, I applaud it. Never mind. I'm changing everything I've said. I love this. I love the ending. This is exactly it. But we have to be like Morgan, and we just have to be strong enough to just say, it's time. And just like end it. Because that thing that we love, it's not there, even though it kind of teases us with flashes of still being there.
Yeah. AMC needs to just do it. This
is a zombie show.
Misery.
Like actual.
Let it know that it's gonna go though.
Right.
So
exactly.
that way they can have a relatively satisfying finale.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right.
Well, we'll talk about this more in the future. Probably not in the next episode, but
no.
Somewhere down the line.
Yeah, for sure. All right, folks. Thanks so much for watching.
See ya.
Bye.
Ignore the bell, people. We're gonna keep going. We're still ignoring it. Don't worry. I don't know what that. I think that's the fire drill. All right. We're gonna go home. Yeah. All right. We're done.